ጤና ይስጥልኝ ተከበራችሁ ተመልካቾቻችን ይህ በዳያስፖራ ቴሌቪዥን የተዘጋጀ የሚቀርብላችሁ የጌራ ሾው ላይቭ ፕሮግራም ነው። ዛሬ ፕሮግራሜ ላይ ይዤላችሁ የቀረብኩት ሚስተር ጄፍ ፒርስ ነው። ሚስተር ጄፍ ፒርስ ጸሐፊና ሂስቶሪያን ነው። ካናዳ ተወላጅ ነው። እንግሊዘኛ ፕሮግራማችን የሚሆነው በእንግሊዘኛ ነው። በአገራችን ወቅታዊ ጉዳዮች ዙሪያ እንነጋገራለን። አሁንም እንደተለመደው በእናንተ በተከበራችሁ ተመልካቾቼና እንዲሁም በዲያስፖራ ቴሌቪዥን ስራ ባልደረቦቼ ስም ሚስተር ጄፍ ጥሪያችንን አክብሮ ቪያ ዙም ወደ ፕሮግራማችን ብቅ ስላለልን ከልብ እያመሰገንኩ አብራችሁ እንድትቆዩ በአክብሮት ጋብዛለሁ። Mr. Jeff, it's good to have you on the Gera Show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, Mr. Jeff. First, let's start our conversation about the protest. You guys recently did one in Toronto, Canada, and a lot of diaspora, Ethiopian diasporas did this protest, pretty much on major cities throughout the world. And how was in Toronto? If you take me there and if there was any accomplishment.
Yeah, well, Toronto, we don't have the diaspora population that you would have in, say, Washington, D.C., or perhaps even in New York, but we have substantial numbers enough to make it work. And we had what I think might be the best turnout that they've seen for a protest in the past year. I mean, I've been to at least one other, and the numbers that we got, I was coming towards it, joining it after it already started. I could hear this noise, this wave of like cheering around the corner from a building. So it was quite impressive. But as usual, what they did was they held the protest right across from the CBC building. And the CBC, for those of your viewers who don't know, is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It's our national broadcaster. So, of course, in their infinite wisdom, they chose to ignore us completely. Because, you wouldn't want to get, a news story that's right within range of your own building. So that got ignored. But, yeah, Toronto did really well. We had protests right across Canada as well. In my hometown, my original hometown of Winnipeg, where you can have temperatures in the winter, sometimes of minus 30, 40 below. I don't know what the temperature was on Sunday, but it was freezing cold, and you could see like snow flurries going across the ground. There are these protesters going out with their Ethiopian flags, and you're going, okay, that's dedication. Because we were in the drizzle, but they're in the snow. You're going, okay. Good for you. Don't want to be with you, but you go ahead. So it was a great day. It was a fantastic day.
Were you one of the organizers?
No, although I did speak. Strangely enough, I was asked and had a conference by phone with the organizers of Washington who asked me for advice in terms of strategizing for that. And so they said they wanted to talk to me, which was quite an honor because I don't know, even though I've written, I don't know what merited them thinking that I could help them strategize. But I said to them, look, let's take a page from Martin Plaut's book, because whether you agree or disagree with Martin's beliefs in terms of the Tigray conflict, he certainly understands media, and he is a very smart tactician. And he always says, look, reporters don't want to cover a protest with placards and demo. They want to cover something that's a spectacle. I'm paraphrasing roughly. And I said, give them a spectacle. So I suggested to them, get 2 coffins and label them something like truth in reportage of Ethiopia and truth in reportage on Africa. So when you saw those two coffins go up behind one of the speakers, Emmanuel, in the Washington March, I came up with that. So I helped a little bit for that. I haven't seen the footage of it yet, but apparently it went over pretty well. So, I mean, what you guys did in Washington was amazing. You set the bar so high for everybody else.
Yes,
so,
the turnout was great in Washington, D.C. I was there.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So you guys did your protest in Toronto. You said that was in front of the Canadian Broadcasting Building. So at the end, did you guys have any coverage by the Canadian medias?
I don't know of Toronto. I didn't see any. What I was really looking for was whether anybody clued in and finally made the connection that everything that we were doing was coordinated, because that was the whole point. The whole point was to send a message from around the world. I mean, you and I both know they had protests in Brussels. They had protests in Israel. We had protests in Phoenix, Denver, Seattle, LA, New York, right across the United States. We had a fantastic protest in London. So I was looking to see if any of the major wire services were smart enough to go, oh, this is significant. But of course, they failed us again. So I noticed that there was journalistic coverage of the march in Calgary, and I think one other city, I forget where. But what you saw mainly was local coverage. I mean, there's a great story, maybe you've seen as well, in Seattle. This is how stupid they were. Let me read it for you. You must have heard about this too yesterday. They I'll just read this to you, so I'll screw up the shot. Channel 13 Fox affiliate in Seattle, and they first put out a story with just the photos, saying demonstrators are marching through downtown Seattle protesting the verdict of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. So I mean, they didn't even get the event right. Somebody just poked the camera out, took shots of the march, and you see multiple people in the shot wearing the Ethiopian colors. And they couldn't even be bothered to go downstairs and actually ask somebody what was going on. And there was such a backlash against, of course, this, that they pulled the story and still screwed it up, because the new headline, which would be failed by any journalism school, said they changed it to protesters march through downtown Seattle. Yes, and water's wet. And their story that's now, I presume, is still on the website says, oh, this protest was just against sanctions on Eritrea. So I mean, you're still not getting it right, and you're so dim that you didn't even bother to do your homework. Can you imagine, in your journalistic career, because of when you were a young reporter, a journalist, if you went out and did something, I'll just take a picture, but I won't bother to ask what's going on. Unbelievable. So but we did make some progress. There are some stories out there in terms of local coverage on different places, which got it right. I think there was an excellent story in, I believe it was Austin, Texas. I'd have to check. Which did a very good job. So next time we do better. That's what we have to do.
True, but just curious, was there any article was written in Canada or the media was saying anything since this unrest started in Ethiopia?
I haven't seen anything, and I've been keeping an eye out. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe somebody will bring it to my attention. I don't know when you're airing the show, but hopefully somebody will bring it to my attention. I have sort of given up waiting for these guys to wake up. So I don't hold out too much hope, because for them, the story was decided ages ago in terms of following one narrative. So the thinking behind this is so blinkered in terms of expecting, oh, well, they're marching because the government, or in support of the government, which is not what we did this for at all. As a matter of fact, there was a speech given in LA which made it clear, look, we also hold Prime Minister Abiy accountable in terms of how things are proceeding. And we want more concern for this, this, and this. So I have stopped pinning my hopes in terms of coverage that has initiative. Now I work on things in terms of, okay, why don't we investigate and find things which are so big that they can't ignore them anymore? And that's what I look for, which is why I've done stories on the UN, because they expect you to come up with stuff that, say, implicates the TPLF. What they can't ignore is the collusion of the UN if we keep finding more and more of the evidence there. They're going to have to sooner or later accept that they should be covering this stuff. So that's my perspective on it.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me take you back to Ethiopia. I know you are a very good friend of Ethiopians and you love that country, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I do.
How many times have you been there, by the way? And when was the
I've
last
only
time
actually
you were
been
there?
I've only actually been there twice, to be honest with you. And the second time I went there in 2013 for the sake of researching my book Prevail. The second time, as many of your viewers might know, I was enlisted by 2 diaspora groups to go and report on the situation and try to get the truth out. They sent me, and I said, well, why don't you send one of your own? Why don't you send somebody from the diaspora who's fluent in Amharic, which I'm not. I can say Eshi, and that's about it. And you don't want to hear me say other things because it would be hurt your ears. And they said to me, they won't listen to us. And how sad is that? The fact that they couldn't even get themselves heard, that it takes a white guy to go over and report on these things in the hopes that maybe they will pay attention. So I went there the second time in August.
This August, I mean the past August.
Yeah, this past August that came. So I went all over the place there to report.
Where exactly you were and what you have noticed there?
A lot, but of course the situation is such in flux that if anything, probably conditions are noticeably worse. I went to investigate the Maikadra massacre, so I went all the way out to Humera and briefly, and then the Maikadra, where my team interviewed several witnesses. They brought out, you can see online, the videos where we have a pan of just, I think there were something like 80 people who came. We could only interview so many and gave the accounts of the Maikadra massacre, eyewitness survivors and witnesses. I went to Wallo. I went and visited 2 IDP camps in Desi. Now, at the time in August, you had something like 100,000 IDPs. I think the quote was something like 5 or 7 NGOs were paying attention. All of the attention was focused on Tigray. And 100,000 IDPs need attention in Wallo. It must be exponentially, significantly higher than that now. It must be just horrendous. And nobody is giving them enough attention or aid. And I hadn't even managed to get to Afar region. I wanted to get to Afar region, but flights couldn't go there at the time. I interviewed, we went out to a base which not even local Ethiopian stations and networks were able to visit. We got special permission to go there, but at the last minute, some bureaucrat in Addis Ababa pulled the plug and we didn't get to speak to the officers who were quite willing to talk to us. And that was interesting just to see the soldiers. And I wanted to go there to humanize them because they've been portrayed in Western media as these villains in terms of alleged war crimes, blah, 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 and to see what is it that they're going through. We got briefly to look at that. We got to interview Amhara farmers who are defending their little plot of earth. We got to interview Amhara militia and get their anecdotes. But there was so much more that I would have liked to have done. There's so much more, and there just wasn't enough time. And the logistics, of course, the situation is so in flux. I badly want to go back there now because somebody like me has to bear witness so that nobody can do the same thing of saying, well, let's not trust them. Let's not take their word for it. More has to be done. we're not getting the full picture of what's happening in the Afar region. We're not getting the full picture in terms of what's happening in Wallo still. We're not, let's go out to the Amhara region and discover what these people are putting up with. That needs to get shared to the West, because every day you wake up and you see the Western news reports, and it's not even close to reality. I mean, a perfect example of that is the U.S. warning, oh, Americans should flee the city and race out. They're on the edges of the Capitol. Well, no, they're not. You know?
In your opinion, are they doing it deliberately, or they really don't know the fact on the ground over there?
A combination of both is like the largest case of cognitive dissonance I've ever seen in my life. I think what happened was a reporter who has turned into something of an acquaintance and a friend, although we've never met, Jamal Countess, who is a photojournalist for Getty Images.
Yes.
Really sets the record and says, look, you got these fixers right at, what's it called? The hotel, Northern Star Hotel in McKellar. And they lie in wait for these rubes who fly in to cover the Tigray crisis. And of course, they're waiting. And they're operatives for the TPLF. And if you don't have it on the ball, you can be led astray and duped. And they'll take you and show you just what you want to see. But then after a while, you have these ingrained biases because, of course, they've taken you and have their little set pieces of tragedy that they show you. And so now you're biased against the Ethiopian side of things. A perfect example of this is I've had direct message debate with Tom Gardner, who writes for The Economist and The Guardian, and he's convinced from talking to certain people in Axum, in refugee camps, that the Axum massacre occurred. Well, as it was depicted, that is impossible, because we have video footage of what it was like on November 30th during the time of the religious celebration. You can see people walking around, sweet as you please, relaxing on benches in the sunlight, religious pilgrims coming and going. Now, how was that possible if there was a massacre and blood in the streets outside the church, outside the cathedral, if it only happened the day before? It's ridiculous. So this person says, of course it happened. I'm going, really? How do you explain this? And of course, I haven't had communication with this person once, because he said, explain to me then this. I never got a reply, because they just don't want to hear it. They've got it so into their heads. How do you explain a Declan Walsh and a Finbar O'Reilly who go into Tigray, and Declan Walsh writes, highly motivated young recruits, and then we see photos of children with rifles? My question is, what the hell is wrong with you? And I think it's a combination of, to use the Western expression, they've drank the Kool-Aid. They believe that they're on the side of right. We can pick how many holes and lies in Nama Elbager's reportage. This is a person who has a clear vendetta for some reason against Ethiopia. God knows why. The motivations don't interest me so much as the methodology. We have to figure out, how do we get better Western reportage? Why are there so many people? It's always ironic that I'm the person who says this. Why do we have so many people who look like me, who go over to Africa to interpret Africa for the rest of the world? Now, that's not the only problem. The thing is, as Nama Elbager proves, you can have a person who's even an African who serves a agenda of a media corporation, because the editors and the producers back in London and New York are still white, and often white males. So the whole system has to change. You have to get reform of that. Why they do this? Again, I think they really bought the whole package. They really think they're in the right. And I've run into such resistance. When I first did this, I had reporters come back at me with, now they don't anymore, but they would come back to me with questions that were pretty much, how dare you challenge the way we write these things? Yeah, I do, because I know how the hot sausages are made, and you're getting away with this, and no, you shouldn't. So.
Interesting. So let me take you to these IDP camps. What's their day-to-day life looks like? These people in the IDP camps.
It's not a case of you have people. It's not a case of, say, how can I articulate this? I think the go-to reference for many Westerners who watch these sad commercials on television, where look at poor little X-child, he lives on one meal a day, and let's get him something like this. It's not like that. What you have is converted. One of the ones that we visited was a converted high school. I believe the population there at the time was something like 1,500 for just that one IDP facility. But you've got multiple people sleeping in one long room on the floor. One NGO contributed something like 50 mattresses, and they looked at them and went, well, thanks. And of course, they were very self-congratulatory over giving them 50 mattresses. There's like 1,200 people there that needed them. There's food. The actual contributions came largely not from governments, but from the people of Desi themselves. They gave. They were the ones that were keeping things afloat. We were there when, they were handing out food and I guess around lunchtime for people, and you saw little cute toddlers running around with a carrot in their hand to make sure they get their 3 squares. But of course, it's minimal. Nobody wants to be in a facility like that. Nobody wants to be homeless. Nobody wants to lose all their belongings. And it's more of the psychological and spiritual impact on these people. You're hearing stories about, I lost X relative. I don't know where he is. I don't know where she is. 2 family members are gone. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Or I get a call and they tell me horror stories about what's like over here where they are. And we met. It's in one of my reports. It's in the report on Desi titled Displaced on YouTube, where 2 young men, one was 19 years old, one is, I believe, 21. They're both nice young men. But of course, this is what do you get when you take 2 young men, take them out of an environment, make them homeless, take them away from where they can get an education, put them in a place where all that you can have is daily reminders of deprivation. And you add to that hearing stories about how it happens to their father, mother, sister, brother, whatever. You end up with an angry young person who is perfect for recruitment to be a soldier for whatever. That is how you create and perpetuate this stuff over and over and over again. Well, congratulations, TPLF. You've just created a new generation that hates you. If you wanted to motivate people to make sure that you never get into control, you have. That's what I saw.
Interesting. Let me bring you now to the international community again. In your view, why do you think this international community, especially the United States, not supporting the Ethiopian government or the people of Ethiopia? What do they achieve? What do they benefit out of this? Instead of helping, threatening with a bunch of sanctions and all kind of things. Your opinion on this, please.
My opinion is a personal one. There are people far more qualified than me, like, say, Lawrence Freeman or John Abink or Ann Fitzgerald, to give you a more political science sort of answer. But in listening to them and in watching their posts, as near as I can tell, the consensus seems to be you're looking at the U.S. administration, which already had a long history of backing the TPLF back in the day, as you know. I mean, everybody's seen the footage of Susan Rice, like, dancing with these guys, who's a close friend of Mel Zenawi. They send over Feltman, who claims now they never knew him, to give a eulogy, and he probably didn't know. But the fact that they sent him to do this, the fact that you have others who are all close to the TPLF high-ranking members. These are the ones they know. These are their pals that they could count on to do what is expected of them in the Horn of Africa to keep what they consider stability in the region. Now along comes Abe, along comes the broom that sweeps all this clean. And you have a U.S. government that actively tried to say it was a bad idea to have a democratic election in Ethiopia. Moreover, you got a clear mandate for Abiy, and they still won't let it go. So as near as I can tell, this is all about putting our dear friends back in power because we know them and we can trust them and we know what they'll do what we want, as opposed to this new guy who they don't know this guy. They don't know what he's capable. He actually stands up for his own people. I'm not a pro-Abiy, anti-Abiy, anything Abiy person. But time and again, whenever you see Africa, an African country, an African leader asserting their own rights, saying, no, we're not going to do what you tell us to do. We're going to follow our own agenda. Down you go. I mean, this is a country which had sent the CIA to help the Belgians assassinate Lumumba in the Congo, So, I mean, what can you expect? And so what we have is we have an open collusion between the U.S. administration and a terrorist organization on a scale which is just mind-boggling. More than 400 U.S. aid trucks, WFP trucks or whatever aid trucks disappear. Where'd they go? I can show you internal communications which were leaked to me by the UN looking the other way in terms of forced recruitment, in terms of witnesses telling me about how there were UN workers who were beaten and detained by the TPLF. Nope, UN won't bother to make that public either. They are keeping a lot of this under wraps. There's documentation to prove it. And still, nobody wants to bring that up. Nobody wants to pay attention to that. I have an internal security report that says the TPLF are looting and vandalizing the UN vehicles and their warehouses. I have it in print, and still the UN will not go public with that. That's an internal document, and where is the Western media covering that? So the purpose of all this is let's put back the guys that we know and trust, because we don't trust any other person. They'll do what we expect them to do. This is why that march on Sunday around the various events around the world is so important. This has to expand to become a true revival of Pan-African movement to say, no, because you can be sure that they will try this strategy again in another country, possibly in Africa, maybe in Asia, maybe in the Middle East. They'll do it again. We have to have that build. The stakes are too high.
Interesting. As you know, the State Department sent out a note to the U.S. citizens, to leave Ethiopia immediately.
Sorry, say again. Oh, sorry. About the evacuation? Yes.
Yes. And also the USAID in Ethiopia was ready to leave the country. And they were saying that we're going to leave. But today we heard that, they changed their mind, that decision, and they wanted to stay helping. So why do you think that? Is that because they start realizing the facts on the ground, or the recent protests make that effect?
I even checked with my sources, but the thing is, I have to laugh because Ethiopia called their bluff probably. It went, go ahead, leave. Because the logic of this is, the arrogance of this is just through the ceiling. Where is it written that aid must come from the U.S. government? For decades, for ages, generations of Ethiopians have grown up with aid Nobody wants to stay on aid. Nobody wants that. Any self-respecting nation and its people want to be free of that kind of shackles of charity. So the thing is, for USA to say, well, we'll pack up our trucks and go. Really, will you take the missing ones too? Go ahead, go, because the very first casualty of that would be the TPLF. We already have more than 400 missing trucks. We already have photos of Getachew Reda on a satellite phone next to a guy in WFP cap who clearly looks like he does more than just work for that operation. So by all means, go. We'll see. And you can go talk to other NGOs in Europe or in other parts of the world to say, can you please help? Yes, you can, blah, blah, blah. I think they retracted because hopefully, I hope I'm right, that basically Ethiopia collectively, whether it's government or its people or both, said, yeah, fine. And they went, oh, well, then we'll stay. Because, they're basically, the TPLF are working hand in hand with still some sympathetic officials within the UN. We know that U.S. aid is working with them. We know this for a fact. There are sources who tell us this. So I will not shed a tear if they pack up and leave at all. And I don't think the regions will be any worse off than they were before. It says, if I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, for most of 2021, the majority of aid that went into Tigray until relatively recently was provided by the Ethiopian government itself. Yes? I think I'm correct on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You confirm that, or am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Yeah. Therefore, what is the great loss? So go away.
Interesting. If you say that the U.S. government want the TPLF to be back in power, so if that happened, for God's sake, what do you think Ethiopia will look like in your view?
First, pass me a rifle and teach me how to use it. I'm not kidding. Second, let's not even imagine such a scenario, because we don't even have to imagine it. We have 27 years of TPLF in power. And what's hilarious is listening to the apologists say, well, the regime was repressive, but look at the economic miracle that are you kidding me? I was there in 2013. I was in Tigray. I saw the poverty level that was there along with the rest of the country. We know that it would just go back to being business as usual, except that it would probably be just a steady massacre, a slow motion massacre of all of the peoples once and for all that they would try to eliminate. I mean, I used to balk a little at Namen Zelike, comparing them to Nazis. And then I did more history. I dug a little deeper. And I thought, yep, he's right. They're Nazis. You have the same sort of mentality of saying, we are the chosen people, in the same way that the German Nazis identified with Aryan sort of white males. You have the same mythology. There's a clip that floats around social media of some historian, if we can be generous in calling him that, who claimed that Tigrayan culture is an antecedent to Egypt, to Babylon, even to, they named the Tigris River in Mesopotamia. Really? This will be news to every respectable archaeologist, antiquarian, historian of the classical periods, all of that going back. It's just ridiculous. So the mythology is there. And then we have, of course, the fall guy people that they would want to wipe off the face of the globe. Their big villain is the Amhara people. So the thought of them being back in power would be an absolute disaster. And I think on the whole, Ethiopians wouldn't stand for it for 1 minute. I mean, let me add a very important note here. Mm-hmm. When I was traveling in August and interviewing people, the people in IDP camps, even the people in IDP camps, did not express resentment or hate against Tigrayans. It was against the TPLF. These are people who come from rural villages and outlying communities, but you know, we can't be condescending or patronizing and thinking, oh, well, maybe they're uneducated. No, these are smart people. They knew who the enemy was. They knew who made them homeless. They knew who killed their relatives. They knew who is still trying to kill their relatives. They said TPLF. And then we have the example of, say, Tigrayan activists like Solomon Waldegarma. We have Hermela Aragawi, who are of Tigrayan descent, who can tell you, no, it's not the Tigrayan people, it's the TPLF. Yes, there is support among Tigrayans for this, but, you know, the enemy is a political one, trying to exploit ethnic division and create ethnic division. So you get them back in power, yeah, identity cards, pogroms, mass massacres, absolute disaster. But let's make sure that doesn't happen.
That's true. Let me bring you back to U.S. now. You know, the current president, about 3 months ago, bring all the troops from Afghanistan back home.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, American soldiers will not or should not die for somebody else's problems. And now he's planning or, you know, sending or deploying U.S. Army to Ethiopia. Your take on that, please.
Well, I haven't heard that he's deploying more to Africa in terms of that. I know that there's the base in Djibouti, which
yes.
Something like, what is it, 500 to, I'm probably wrong in terms of the figure that's deployed there. And of course, there was an officer who made the unfortunately politically remark that, oh, we're ready to move in to evacuate Americans if need be, which everybody took rightly to be a lovely pretext for intervention. I very much hope the United States is not stupid enough to think that they can put one foot on Ethiopian soil. It would be the worst mistake. No one disputes that the United States has superior firepower, has a well-trained, well-disciplined army. That's not the point. You would be automatically catalyzing, it would be the catalyst for just a disaster. It would be of huge proportions. And it would seal the fate of assuring that the United States would not be welcome in the Horn of Africa for decades to come. But I don't think it will get to that point. I don't think that's what they're thinking. I hope so. I've been wrong before. But the thing is, I think all of this is muscle flexing to bring them to the table. And Bronwyn Bruton told me a wonderful anecdote. She was at years ago at a meeting of State Department officials, including assistant, I hope I have this right, assistant secretaries of state. And the way they phrased it, the way they told the analysts was, the job is to keep Africa off the desk of the president. And that was in 2012, 2013. And that tells you loads about the way they think. They would rather Africa, hey, we don't want to bother with you. So all of this pressure is to just, if you get them to the table, then they can claim it's a foreign policy win. Afghanistan, the pullout of Afghanistan, which actually was Trump's move. Trump was the one that started it. Biden finished it, but finished it in a spectacularly incompetent fashion. I think they're looking for a foreign policy win, and that's what this is about. To say, look what we did, and then they walk away. But what they don't realize is the TPLF has been wagging the dog all this time, and will keep bugging them always to keep involved. They would rather just put the two at the table and go, okay, off you go. There you're talking. Look, they're talking. And that would be it. But of course, you can't talk to this terrorist organization. You can't give them anything because it won't end there. And every Ethiopian knows that. Everyone in the Ethiopian diaspora knows that. Everybody with a brain who's watching this knows this, except those within the Beltway. They don't seem to know this. So I think that's what it's about. I think it's to create a panic and fear. And it's not going to work because they really don't understand you people. They don't understand what you're made of. They don't understand the spirit. They have no clue what works. I always find that fascinating. When I run into some people who have lived in the country for years, whereas I've only been to the country twice. And it's not because I'm more clever. I don't think they listen to you. I don't think they pay attention. If you tell me something and say, we're like this, I go, okay. And I file it away and I take it and I listen. And if somebody tells me something else, I file it away and take it. And if enough people say, no, we're not going to put up with this, okay, believe them. And they don't. They just, it's mind-boggling. All of the history of Ethiopia tells you we will not put up with somebody else setting foot on our soil and telling us what to do. All through the history it says that.
Yeah, that is
you would
true.
think somebody would listen.
That is true. That is true. As a result of all this, currently the Ethiopian Americans here in the U.S., majority of us voted for this president. Majority of us were Democrats. But don't get me wrong, we all love this great country, but now we start hearing the current administration. So what do you tell us about it,
Well, the thing is, I'm in a difficult spot here because I'm a Canadian.
Yes.
So as a Canadian, I disapprove of your government anyway. We tried to burn down your White House. You guys didn't listen to us last time. You decided to go your own way. Well, that was mostly the British. But the weird thing about American politics is, to me, they're two sides of the same coin of a financial 1% elite. As I was saying to you casually just before we ran the video, we started taping, I think it's just a different degree of ignorance in terms of Africa, whether it be a Republican or whether it be a Democrat. And I should hasten to add, I can see that reflected as well within, say, Tories or Liberals within our government here in Canada. And then if you go to Britain, it's even worse. It's just appalling because they don't even know what they don't know. They just assume they know everything because they used to run much of Africa. So, of course, they won't listen to it at all over there. I think that a message was sent through the voting in support of the Republican Party because the Democrats so badly let you down. And that's fine. Unfortunately, you bought the cart. And what you're going to end up with is a Republican Party that at the end of the day is not much better in terms of enlightened policy initiatives towards Africa any more than the Democrats were. In some cases, however, I will concede that Republicans have a smarter sense of realpolitik about foreign affairs. A liberal Democrat likes to see the world as they want it to be seen. A Republican thinks that they see the world as it is and does that. And what you really need is, quite frankly, a little more Canadian in your mix of people go, hey, how about we actually listen to the people we're talking to over in Africa and ask them what they want first before we try to impose a government system on them. The thing is that I coined a phrase which I use in the new book, which will be coming out next year, called The Gifts of Africa. The West will begin to understand Africa when it realizes it's not talking to a child, it's talking to its mother. And it's true. There is not a respect level the same way that you have with European powers. Can you imagine if the diplomats and leaders of the West spoke to France or spoke to Belgium or spoke to Germany the way that they talk to African countries? Nobody would stand for that. Mm-hmm. And yet, and to your great credit, African diplomats and African leaders take this in and, okay. And they listen patiently because they've had to put up with it for so long that, they're used to it. Whereas no European power and its representatives would ever tolerate that kind of lack of respect. Interesting.
Mr. Dave, I know I don't want to take much of your time, and I also have a very limited time. But before we conclude our conversation, I heard you mentioning that you can't wait to go back to Ethiopia. And is there any time frame for that? When are you returning back to Ethiopia? And also, I'm sorry to interrupt you, and what it looks like, the Canadian government's stand, like for their citizens. Is there any memo or any note that went out for Canadian to leave Ethiopia, or any warnings that you heard of?
There was a travel advisory issued for Canadians. I think that was more reflective of U.S. pressure to put on the Canadian government. I think it's just as silly as the American one is. The distance that the TPLF and the fighting is from the capital, same as everybody. But at the same time, my sources tell me that Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, has a very good working relationship with Prime Minister Abiy. So there's room to grow there in terms of talks. In terms of my own personal plans, to be honest with you, it has to come down to financing, because I need people to sort of back me and finance the trip to go back, because it costs. It costs in terms of flying, it costs in terms of driving around the country, it costs in terms of hotel, other expenses. So I have to get that arranged. In the same way the two diaspora groups raised the funds last time to send me. I would like to go as soon as possible. Ideally, I'd like to go mid-December, because we know that the situation is very much in flux. I think, again, we've seen this drag on for a year now, but I'm thinking that maybe something will be very decisive next month and the month after. At the very, very least, I want to go see it. I want to go see. There's so much that I didn't get to do last time. I really want to get out to the Afar region and report on the situation for those people, because they don't deserve what's happening to them at all. They're putting up a really brave fight, and they're loyal to Ethiopia, and they deserve to have their story told. So hopefully we can make this happen as soon as possible, but we'll see.
So Dave, thank you. But at last, I want to give you again one more chance if you want to say anything to the people of Ethiopia, to the Ethiopian government, and to your close friends here in the United States and Canada.
It's not my place to say anything to the Ethiopian government. They've got enough on their plate than to bother with little old me. I think I know that a couple of people know who I am. In terms of the Ethiopian people, you have support. You have support that's growing around the world. What you saw yesterday is just the beginning. In 1935, there were protests around the world. I know this because I wrote the history of it in my book. I never thought in my lifetime I would see a revival of that spirit of 35. People are starting to wake up to realize what the struggle is all about, and they are with you. So I hope this brings you some strength and comfort, because everybody's concerned, of course, who lives there in terms of what's going to happen. Are things going to settle down? Are the terrorists going to be put back into their cave where they belong? Hopefully they will, but there are people who are with you, and we will find more. And we are going to build this movement, because it's got to be a movement, and find more allies, both people who look like me and people who are across Africa, who pick up the baton and run with it, who carry that Pan-African spirit. Just please know that we are with you.
Mr. Jeff Pierce, thanks for having me in the Gera Show, and it's a pleasure. I hope to see you again back on Gera Show once your new book is released.
Thank you.
And, but for now, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. ተመልካቾቻችን እስካሁን ስትከታተሉ የቆያችሁት ጌራ ሾው ላይቭ ፕሮግራም ነበር። ከፕሮግራሜም ቆይታ የነበረኝ ከሚስተር ጄፍ ፒርስ ጋር ነበር። ሁላችሁም በጣም ጥሩ ጊዜ እንዳሳልፋችሁ እርግጠኛ ነኝ። አሁን በድጋሚ በእናንተ በተከበራችሁ ተመልካቾችና እንዲሁም በዲያስፖራ ቴሌቪዥን ስም ሚስተር ፒርስ ጥሪያችንን አክብሮ ወደ ጌራ ሾው ብቅ ስላለን ከልብ እያመሰገንኩኝ ለአሁኑ ፕሮግራማችንን በዚሁ አጠቃልናል። እኛ አንዳንድ ነገር ማድረስ የምትፈልጉ በድረገጽ አድራሻችን www.dtv-tv.com ውስጥ በመግባት ወይም ደግሞ ጌራ ሾውን ፈልጎ ጌራ ፔጅ ፌስቡክ ላይ ጌራ ሾውን ፈልጎ ላይክ በማድረግና ቤተሰብ በመሆን እንዲሁም ከስክሪናችን ስር የምታዩትን ሊንክ ዩቲዩብ ሊንክ ላይክ እና ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ታርሱልን ትችላላችሁ። እስካሁን ስለተከታተላችሁን ከልብ እናመሰግናለን። መልካም ምሽት።